This is the story they tell along the Thai coast. Whether it's true or legend, no one knows for certain. After the 2004 tsunami, survivors from different villages told the same account. A dream the night before. A woman in white robes, pointing inland. Morning of December 26th. An overwhelming feeling. Don't go to sea. Get inland. Now. The ones who listened survived. The ones who didn't. Their boats washed up 3 miles inland, wrapped around trees, hulls shattered, empty. When Buddhist monks showed survivors photos of deities, asking, "Who did you see?" they all pointed to the same statue. Guanyin. Hello, it's Matt, and something doesn't add up. This goddess, the one millions pray to across Asia, didn't start out female. 1,500 years ago in India, she was a he. And what makes that even stranger? She's not just popular. In many places, she's more worshipped than the Buddha himself. Over 1 billion people call her name. So let me take you back to India, to meet the god before the goddess, and to show you something I've never seen in any other religious tradition. The moment love became so powerful, it literally broke a god. (500 CE, India). Meet Avalokiteshvara. If you watched our video on Tara, you know him, the Bodhisattva of compassion, the god whose heart was too big for one body. Mahayana Buddhism introduced the Bodhisattva vow, the promise to save every sentient being before accepting your own enlightenment. Avalokiteshvara took that vow seriously. And the vow itself, traditional texts record it like this: "If I should ever abandon even a single being, may my body shatter into pieces." He meant it, too seriously. He sits in meditation, opens his awareness completely, and hears them all. Every scream from the hell realms, a mother burying her child, someone dying alone in a prison cell, simultaneously, forever. And he realizes something that shatters him. One being, infinite suffering. No matter how hard he works, no matter how many lifetimes he dedicates to this, there will always be more pain, more fear, more death, more beings drowning in the ocean of samsara while he frantically tries to bail them out one cup at a time. The Karandavyuha Sutra, one of the earliest Mahayana texts about Avalokiteshvara, describes what happens next. His head splits into 11 pieces from the grief of witnessing infinite suffering. Not metaphor, not symbolic breakdown. His body breaks, completely. Most people don't choose transformation when they hit this point. They shut down. They stop caring. They go numb. He didn't. Buddha Amitabha appears in the wreckage and does something unexpected. He doesn't lecture Avalokiteshvara about attachment being the root of suffering. Doesn't tell him this is all illusion anyway. Doesn't remind him that clinging causes pain. He rebuilds him into something more. 11 heads, to see in all directions at once. 1,000 arms, to reach everyone simultaneously. Picture the statues. 1,000 arms radiating from her body like rays of light, each hand holding something different. A lotus, a vase, a wish-granting jewel, a rope to pull you from drowning. Each palm, an eye watching. You don't become weaker when you break from caring too much. You become capable of what was impossible before. 1,000 hands reaching, 11 faces watching, one heart that refuses to quit even after it shatters. This is what compassion looks like when it goes all the way. It destroys you and rebuilds you as something the world actually needs. And then Buddhism started moving east, along the Silk Road toward China. And this god, This 1,000-armed male deity of compassion went missing. By the time he reached China, he had become she, and nobody can agree on why. First century CE. Buddhism crosses the Himalayas. Avalokiteshvara enters China through Silk Road merchants, monks carrying texts, translators working by candlelight turning Sanskrit into Chinese characters. Early translations, 1st and 2nd century, describe Avalokiteshvara as male. By the Tang dynasty, 7th through 9th century, fully female in Chinese art and worship. The name even changes. Avalokiteshvara becomes Guanyin, perceiving sound, and that name is everything. Not some cries, not the loudest ones, not the most important ones. Every single cry, everywhere, always. That's her entire function, to hear what nobody else hears. So what happened between India and China? How does a god change gender crossing a mountain range? So which one is true? A miracle, a mistake, or a decision? 4 stories, 4 theories, and the truth is probably all of them. Before Buddhism ever reached China, there was a local legend about a princess named Miao Shan. A king has 3 daughters. Miao Shan refuses to marry. Her father orders her executed. The executioner raises his axe. It shatters into 1,000 pieces. He tries a sword. Same result. He shoots arrows. They veer away. The executioner refuses to continue. So the king orders her temple burned with her inside. The flames rise and transform into lotus flowers. She walks out alive. Years later, the king falls deathly ill. The only cure, arms and eyes from someone who has never felt anger. Miao Shan offers her own. He recovers. And when he discovers his daughter made the sacrifice, he begs forgiveness. She transforms into the 1,000-armed Guanyin. So when Buddhism arrived with stories of Avalokiteshvara, Chinese people said, "We worship that goddess already." The local legend fused with the foreign god. Or maybe it wasn't a story at all. Buddhism faced a problem. China had gods, powerful ones, ancient ones. The Queen Mother of the West, Shi Wangmu, had been protecting Chinese people for 1,000 years before Buddha was even born. Taoism dominated the religious landscape. Chinese temples were full of goddesses, compassion, healing, protection. So why would Chinese people abandon their deities for some foreign male god they'd never heard of? They wouldn't. Buddhism had a choice, adapt or die. So they made Avalokiteshvara match what China understood. Need a mother goddess of compassion? Done. Not accident, survival. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Sanskrit terms in Buddhist texts: mother of compassion, she who hears cries. Chinese translators working from manuscripts, limited context, trying to capture concepts that don't exist in Chinese philosophy yet. Some White Tara imagery traveling with Avalokiteshvara texts, paintings showing a female Bodhisattva. A translator writes she instead of he. An artist paints what the translator described. Next generation sees the painting, assumes that version is correct. One choice, or one mistake, becomes tradition. Or maybe the translators knew exactly what they were doing. Early Chinese Buddhist leaders weren't naive. They saw resistance to a foreign male deity. They saw women excluded from most religious practice. They saw an opportunity. Consciously present Avalokiteshvara as female. Make Buddhism accessible to half the population. Prove Buddhism adapts without losing its core teachings. Compassion doesn't need a fixed gender to save lives. The result? Over the centuries, Guanyin becomes more popular than Buddha himself in some Chinese regions. So which theory is right? Probably all of them. The princess legend provided the story people recognized. Taoist competition provided the pressure to adapt. Translation confusion provided the opening, and Buddhist teachers made the choice. Guanyin didn't happen by accident. She happened because Buddhism understood something that rigid religions never grasp. You either transform to reach people, or you die trying to stay pure. The god who became a goddess didn't just survive in China. She conquered it, and Buddhism lived because she transformed. But understanding why she transformed doesn't explain why she's still the most worshipped Buddhist deity in East Asia today. Not Buddha, not Amitabha, not Avalokiteshvara in his male form, her. And to understand that, we need to look at what she actually does. Today, over 1 billion people across East Asia invoke Guanyin, more than any other Buddhist deity. Why? Because she offers 4 things no other deity provides. Unlike Avalokiteshvara, whose gender shifts across cultures depending on where Buddhism lands, Guanyin locks in China, Japan, where she becomes canon, Korea, Vietnam, always female, permanently. Compare that to our video on Tara, who also refused male rebirth. Both chose to stay female. Both became more powerful because of it. The impact. Young girls across Asia grow up seeing female enlightenment as primary, not secondary, not a footnote, not women can be enlightened too. Female enlightenment as the default face of compassion. She didn't become female by accident. She chose it and never went back. Buddhism can feel abstract. The Eightfold Path. Emptiness. Dependent origination. Beautiful philosophy. But what do you do when your child is dying? Guanyin doesn't deal in abstractions. She has roles, concrete ones. Can't conceive a child? Pray to Guanyin. She's the giver of children. Temples across Asia overflow with offerings from grateful parents. Going to sea? Every fishing boat has her image. Every harbor has her shrine. She protects sailors, has for 1,000 years. Someone sick? Hospitals get built near Guanyin temples. She heals. Someone dies? Her name is the first thing whispered in grief. She comforts the mourning. Not about achieving enlightenment in 3 lifetimes, about surviving today. No tantric initiation required, no teacher's permission needed, no monastery training, no secret transmission, just her name. The mantra is 6 syllables. Namo Guanyin Pusa. Namo. I take refuge. I bow to. Guanyin. Perceiving sound. The one who hears cries. Pusa. Bodhisattva. Enlightened being who saves others. Buddhists chant it. Non-Buddhists chant it. Grandmothers in villages. Soldiers in battle. Mothers in labor. Fishermen in storms. Whisper it now. Namo Guanyin Pusa. Feel the rhythm. 6 syllables that bypass thought and go straight to the part of you that needs help. Later Chinese texts emphasize her speed. Call her name once. She's already moving. Tara acts instantly too. Both refuse to wait for you to purify your karma or prove you're worthy. The difference? Tara saves you from bandits. External threats, physical danger. Guanyin saves you from drowning in grief. Internal collapse, psychological annihilation. The most powerful figure of compassion in Buddhism isn't the Buddha, isn't Avalokiteshvara in his original form. It's a goddess who didn't even exist in India. That's what people kept. Those are the reasons she spread, the roles she filled, the access she granted, the speed she promised. But none of that matters. when everything is on the line. December 1937, Nanjing. Survivors told the same story, temple after temple, years later, again and again, recorded in testimonies compiled by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, and later historians documenting the Nanjing massacre. Japanese army enters the city. Systematic violence begins. Estimated 200,000 to 300,000 civilians killed over 6 weeks. Thousands flee to Buddhist temples for sanctuary. Multiple temples reported the same phenomenon. Soldiers approach the gates, weapons ready. Then, they turn away. No explanation. Survivor accounts describe it the same way. They looked at something we couldn't see, then they left. One testimony mentions a soldier raising his rifle at refugees huddled inside a temple. The gun jammed. He fled. Jiming Temple, one of the oldest in Nanjing. Large Guanyin statue in the main hall, 1,000 arms, 11 heads, ancient. Accounts say thousands of people sheltered there for weeks. No running water, limited food, 3 weeks of waiting to die. Soldiers surrounded the building multiple times, never entered. The temple was never breached. A woman named Chen testified after the war. She described soldiers at the doorway, rifles raised, fingers on triggers. She could see their faces, young, terrified, following orders. The lead soldier stepped forward. She closed her eyes, waited for the shot. Silence. She opened her eyes. He'd stepped back, lowered his rifle. His face, she said, looked like he'd seen something that broke him. The other soldiers asked what he saw. He said, a woman, in white, standing in front of them. They left. Other temples told similar accounts. The pattern repeated across the city. Survivors attributed their protection to the Guanyin statues inside. Was it literal manifestation? Mass psychology? Fear of sacred spaces? Something else entirely? We'll never know. But belief strong enough to survive the worst humans can do to each other. That's not superstition, that's power. The people who believed in her walked out of hell alive, and she keeps her promise. There's a moment when you realize nobody is coming. No answer, no solution, no rescue. You're alone with whatever is destroying you. That's the moment people call her, not because they're Buddhist, not because they understand Mahayana philosophy, because they're going under, and she's the one who answers. The Lotus Sutra, one of the most influential Mahayana texts, puts it like this. If someone calls her name, she hears them immediately. Not eventually. Not after you've purified your karma. Immediately. Buddhist legend says she once descended into the hell realms, not to visit, to save. And she started reforming the beings there, one by one, teaching them, showing them the path, giving them a second chance. The Hell Guardians watched in horror. Their population was dropping, rapidly. She was emptying the realm faster than new beings arrived. So the 10 kings, the judges of the dead, sent her back, kicked her out, not because she was doing harm, because she was too effective. The system requires suffering. She was breaking it. Even hell couldn't hold under that kind of compassion. That's what happens when compassion refuses limits. It doesn't just help here and there. It dismantles the structure that creates suffering in the first place. 1979, South China Sea. A Vietnamese refugee boat. Overcrowded. Engine fails. 6 days adrift. Saltwater blisters on their lips. Children too weak to cry anymore. Adults lying in the bottom of the boat, waiting to die. A grandmother's voice, cracked, barely above a whisper, still chanting, Namo Guanyin Pusa. Others join, one voice, then another, layering together. Hours pass, the sun sets, rises, sets again, dawn of the seventh day. A fishing boat appears on the horizon. The crew later says, "We saw light on the water, we followed it." Documented in oral histories from the Vietnamese American community. All made it through. Resettled in California. The grandmother's granddaughter, now 50 years old, still chants daily. She kept us alive when there was no reason left to live. If you've ever cared about someone and realized you can't fix it, you know this feeling. Death rituals across Asia invoke her name. Not because she explains why it hurts, because she sits with you while it does. Calling her name creates space, between I'm sick and I'm dying, between they're gone and I can't survive this, between nobody's coming and I'm completely alone. She doesn't promise to remove suffering. Buddhism is honest about that. Suffering is part of existence, but she promises something else. You won't face it alone. And when you're drowning in grief, terror, despair, when your own strength is gone and no one's coming to save you, that promise is the only thing that matters, and she keeps it. Guanyin's transformation from god to goddess isn't interesting religious history. It's the key to understanding how Buddhism survived after vanishing from India. The religion that couldn't adapt died where it was born. The religion that transformed conquered a continent. Guanyin's gender transformation proves something essential. Buddhism values the mission over purity. Jung versus Buddha showed the contrast between flexibility and rigidity, between systems that adapt and systems that break. Why Buddhism vanished from India showed what happens when religion can't transform, killed by its own orthodoxy. But everywhere else, Buddhism conquered a continent without a single sword, by becoming what each culture needed. The religion that couldn't adapt died. The religion that transformed spread across Asia and changed millions of lives. Guanyin embodies that principle. Compassion has no fixed form. Buddhist texts say she appears in 33 different forms: gods, humans, children, male, female, whatever you need to hear the teaching. She becomes whatever saves you. 17th century Japan. Christianity is banned, death penalty. Underground Christians needed to worship in secret, so they disguised their faith. Carved statues of the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus, but labeled them as Guanyin holding a child. They called them Maria Canon, Mary Guanyin. Hidden crosses carved into the base, concealed where soldiers wouldn't look. The irony? The disguise worked because the images looked identical. A mother goddess holding a child, offering protection, answering prayers. Different religion, same prayer. Even modern Buddhist organizations notice it. Tzu, a major Taiwanese Buddhist group, commissioned portraits of Guanyin holding a baby that look exactly like Catholic Madonna and child paintings. They hang in Buddhist hospitals across Asia today. She didn't just cross cultures, she crossed religions, Taoism, folk traditions, every Chinese restaurant, every fishing boat. She became bigger than Buddhism itself. Today, over 1 billion people across East Asia invoke her name, more popular than Buddha himself in many regions. Non-Buddhists pray to her. She's everywhere. The transformation worked, not despite the gender change, because of it. You don't need to become Buddhist to call on her. Don't need to believe she literally manifests in green light. Don't need to memorize prayers or buy statues or understand emptiness. You need to be drowning. Close your eyes. Picture a woman in white, 1,000 arms reaching from darkness, eyes that see everything. Say her name. Namo Guanyin Pusa. 3 times. 6 times. Until something shifts. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe it's your brain creating a psychological anchor, a handhold in the mental avalanche. Or maybe she's already moving toward you. Those fishermen on the Thai coast, the ones who saw her in dreams before the tsunami, built shrines in their homes, all of them. Not because they converted to Buddhist philosophy, not because they understood Mahayana doctrine. People don't pray to Guanyin because they understand Buddhism. They pray because at some point in their life, they had no one left to call. And she answered. Guanyin, the god who became a goddess to save more lives, the deity who chose transformation over purity, and the protector who's been waiting for the moment you realize you have no one else to call. If this story stayed with you, you'll want to see what happened with Tara. Same refusal, different path. Watch that next. Curious how Buddhism adapts across cultures? The 3 Schools of Buddhism video shows you the whole landscape. And if you want to understand why flexibility matters, why Buddhism vanished from India tells you what happens when religion can't change. Subscribe for more stories like this, comment which Buddhist figure we should cover next. And remember, when you need protection, you don't have to face it alone. And if you need her, she's already listening. Thanks for watching.